everybody and welcome back to the United Stand. Today I am joined by Ben Jacobs, transfer expert and journalist. Thank you, Ben, so much for joining us. I'm really excited to get into our show.
Yeah, me too. Is that a Christmas jumper behind you?
It is, you know. Do you know what? I've actually got one here. I was going to wear it today just for you. Here we go.
Ooh, it looks a bit like a goalkeeper jersey.
It's nice, isn't it? I was going to wear it, but it's so warm and the radiators are on full blast in here. So I thought I'll save that for a little treat maybe next time. I'll get them to turn the radiators down. But it's really, really nice. It's such good quality. And we need to get one sent out to you, Ben, actually. You've reminded me.
You've shown you've got two. You've got no excuse but to post me one of them.
To which location would be the question?
Neither confirm nor deny where I am half the time. You
exactly.
Web Summit behind me. I'm live from Lisbon from a sports conference today. I can reveal that.
You can't. Breaking news, everyone. Breaking news. That is where Ben Jacobs is. But whilst you are there, Ben, we have got some Manchester United news and updates to get into. We're going to cover quite a few different topics. Incomings, outgoings, a little bit on Elliot Anderson and so much more. Make sure you get your questions in the comments for Ben as well. Any super chats that you want to put a question to Ben Jacobs, make sure you get them in the comments. Last week, Ben, we had a little bit of a Jacobs cracker, as we like to call it, about Anderson. Didn't really go into too much detail, which I respect and understand, but there was more news coming out surrounding Elliot Anderson in the week. I think it was Plettigol from Sky Germany who said that Manchester United are interested in Elliot Anderson and they're exploring that, but Nottingham Forest won upwards of £100 million. We have spoke last week that you think it'll be lower than that. Is that still the case, and can you give us any update on the price?
Yeah, obviously I respect other reporting and I'm talking specifically around the summer, but I'm told there's quite complicated and variable provisions in Elliot Anderson's contract that allows for a move cheaper than the 120 million number that has been reported. Of course, in January, Forest told all of the cards. So if Manchester United want to do something crazy mid-season, Forest probably can name their price. And it may be that some of those reports are hinting at January, but I'm told from people close to the player side that January isn't really something he's seriously considering at this stage. You can never say never, but Thomas Tuchel's basically told Elliot Anderson, just keep doing what you're doing. And if you play regularly, consistently and have stability, you'll make the World Cup squad. So I think Elliot Anderson is quite happy to stay at Nottingham Forest until the summer. Then when we hit the summer period, there's all manner of different variables and provisions, I'm told, in a complicated contract. And it's not identical to Morgan Gibbs-White. And I've not used the word release clause intentionally. So just to sort of pour a bit of cold water on simplifying it by using that phrase. But ultimately, with Morgan Gibbs-White, everyone spoke for months about him being 80 to 100 million, and there was a release clause, but it had to be triggered in a particular way. Tottenham didn't do that. Nottingham Forest took alleged legal action, but it was more a threat than a reality, and Gibbs-White ended up signing a new deal. So Elliot Anderson's contract, I'm told, does have complicated and variable provisions for things like Champions League clubs, or potentially relegation at the other extreme if Forest season doesn't go according to plan. So come summer, I'm told the number will not be 120 million. It will not necessarily even be anywhere close to 100 million. And there will be provisions under certain circumstances that are variable to allow Elliot Anderson to move for a cheaper number, but in the summer. In January, if it's a free-for-all, Forest can name their price. And as I said a moment ago, maybe the player says no, he only wants to determine his future once he knows what Forest have got at the end of this season and after the World Cup passes.
Can I ask you a little follow-up question on that? If everything is done in the correct way to lower the number, like you've just said there, would you say it's closer to 50 than 100?
No, I think it'll be above 50, but nowhere near 100 under certain circumstances. But again, it's variable. So what you'll find is that if Forest go down, there's provisions to get him a whole lot cheaper, as you would expect. If Nottingham Forest qualify for European football, it's a whole lot harder. If Manchester United are a Champions League club, it's a little bit easier. And these kind of clauses can kick in or not kick in, depending on variable circumstances and based upon individual and club performances as far as Forest are concerned. So this is why I'm intentionally not saying Elliot Anderson has a release clause, because I don't think it can be described that way. but there are both contractual and gentleman's aspects between Forest and Elliot Anderson when he moved. And some of that is down to the fact that you may remember Newcastle didn't want to sell Elliot Anderson. Anderson was happy at Newcastle. Newcastle had PSR. They were presented with a situation at the time where they nearly sold Anthony Gordon to Liverpool and Jarrell Quansah was going to go the other way. They agreed that in principle. And then suddenly out of nowhere, Forest came in for Anderson and Yakuba Minter went to Brighton and Newcastle were able to balance their books. But at that point, the player was faced with moving to Nottingham Forest with no guarantees of European football and a feeling if he stayed at Newcastle, he could go on to play Champions League football. And that's obviously proven to be the case as far as Newcastle are concerned. So Elliot Anderson has long-term aspirations to play Champions League football. He was a bit of a financial pawn in a very mad window where Newcastle needed sales. And this is why the contract has complicated elements. But we should stress again, there's a lot of speculation about January. Players happy at Nottingham Forest. He's in the England picture. There's no guarantee we see any Elliot Anderson movement in January. And I think the reports that suggest it could be an astronomical offer are maybe thinking about January. And that may be true because in January, Nottingham Forest hold all the cards. But at the end of the season, I'm told contractually, it's a slightly different situation.
Interesting stuff. One to definitely keep an eye on there. So thank you very much for that update, Ben, there. And I wanted to ask, following up from that, maybe just go away from transfers for just a second. And I wanted to ask slightly on the sale, the Manchester United sale. Was it just a little bit of news blown out of proportion maybe at the time? Why do you think it's gone quiet? I just wanted to get a little bit of an update on that before we move on to the rest of the transfers.
Yeah, takeovers take time, and until anyone engages with the Glazers, it's obviously going to go silent. I think you read it two ways, and my experience in the Middle East is both of these categories happen regularly. One is it's a PR stunt, but then usually they say who they are. Maybe they're creating a consortium, including potentially some ex-Manchester United players, and then they will come out of the woodwork. Or the second thing is you put out there without stock market manipulation that you may be formulating a consortium out of the UAE because you're seeking investors. And even though everybody wrongly assumes everyone from the Middle East that would consider buying Manchester United will have the funds, a lot of the time, if they're private investors or entities, they won't. So sometimes you put a little teaser out there to see who comes forwards to you as you start to compile your consortium and ultimately find the funds to make a potential bid. But at this stage, we're talking about radio silence with the Glazers. Nobody has come forwards directly to Manchester United, which is why they were surprised by the tweet of Turki Al-Sheikh. So it feels to me that this consortium are still building, and maybe nothing happens and they disappear into the sunset and we never hear from them again. Or maybe they're just taking their time to actually get a solid makeup in terms of ambassadors and the most important thing, the funds necessary. And I think the last point in all of this is just timing, because if through their intel, even if they are in a position to speak to the Glazers, they feel this is the wrong time or the wrong price, it could be a case of getting ahead of the market, of monitoring the situation, of waiting a year or two and then making their approach. But there's two reasons it's gone quiet. The first is because every takeover, whether it happens or doesn't happen, takes time. It's not like a transfer. A short period of time would be months. So we've not even hit the period since we learned there was a potential group from the UAE to the point when they may come forwards. We would still be talking if they came out now or at Christmas or in the early year as it being relative super speed, because this isn't a transfer. It doesn't have a day-on-day update. So that's kind of the first thing to note. And then the second aspect in all of this is even if they engage with the Glazers, as we saw with the sale that resulted in Jim Ratcliffe coming in, that takes months. And if it takes 9 months, then that's seen as relatively super speed as well. So this is a very complicated story due to the fact that the group's got to find the funds. They've got to actually approach the Glazers. They've got to meet the valuation. And the last thing I think which has gone under the radar a bit is this drag-on clause. And everyone's aware that the Glazers can effectively and in layman's terms drag out Sir Jim Ratcliffe if somebody wants to buy 100% of the club. And everyone's therefore assuming, and even I've said it, that the Glazers can kind of have their cake and eat it. And that is true. But the drag-on clause is set at $33 a share for Ratcliffe. And due to the fact that any transaction has to give equal consideration to A and B shareholders, including the non-Glazers, if it's 33 for Ratcliffe, it will have to be 33 to all other shareholders and the Glazers. If you do the maths on $33 a share, it's nearly double the market enterprise value, and it comes to about £4.7 billion. And the Glazers want a minimum of 5 billion. And some say that number with the new stadium is more like 6 to 8 billion, because that's where they think the valuation will be between now and, roughly speaking, 2030. So it can be interpreted as the Glazers can just softly have the club up for sale, and if they get the right price, kick out Sir Jim Ratcliffe. But the numbers in the drag-on clause, I think, have been set very strategically at below that 5 billion number, which means that nobody necessarily is going to come in at $33 a share and pacify the Glazers or get anywhere close to their valuation, which means Jim Ratcliffe probably still feels that he's got unlimited time and the Glazers aren't looking to sell imminently. And if the consortium agree with that, they may not come forwards at this point in time, because it may ultimately be a lost cause.
Interesting. So they might wait until that clause is, it's got an expiry date, hasn't it, Ben?
Yeah, the clauses are complicated. So some of them have expiry dates. Some of them are time sensitive after a sale. And that's the case with this one because it came in after 18 months. One or two of them don't expire because there's just sort of an unlimited number that you can pay at any given point in time. But it's logical to think that the longer the Glazers stay, the higher the price goes up of Manchester United due to a mixture of modernisation of the club, on-field success and general inflation. And therefore, further down the line, if the Glazers feel waiting equals cashing in at a higher number, they'll do that. And then from Ratcliffe's point of view, who's to say what his mindset will be 5 or 10 years down the line? Maybe he's aligned with the Glazers that he's happy to go, because at that point he might have done everything he wants to do at the football club, run the sporting department, built the infrastructure, opened up a new stadium, won titles, hopefully. Then if you come back to the fact that for Ratcliffe, this is like a vanity project, and it's maybe more vanity for him and business for Ineos, and it's probably more leaning towards Ratcliffe driving the actual original purchase as opposed to Ineos, which is why we've not seen much connection with their sporting model or with Nice at this point. And then if you think of Ratcliffe's age, 10 years down the line, who's to say that Ratcliffe and the Glazers won't both go, let's go together at an astronomical price? And then the final thing to say is, what if the Glazers don't choose to sell 100% of the club? So it's not all or nothing, because they proved that when Ratcliffe came in and was only a minority investor. Maybe the Glazers say the valuation of the club has risen, you can have a small slice of the pie, but on the premise you're a minority owner to begin with maybe the opportunity to have a conversation another day about buying 100% of the club. And it's contingent on the fact if you come in now, you have to let Jim Ratcliffe continue to run the sporting side. So maybe strategic investment as they try and fund this new stadium may come before we're talking about 100% sale of the club. So I think Jim Ratcliffe is in a more stable position than people realise, even though it's easy to say the Glazers are setting the terms, the Glazers can sell whenever they want, and the Glazers can kick Sir Jim Ratcliffe out.
Interesting stuff. We'll have to see how it develops. I think Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos are starting to actually get a hold of the club now, and the changes that they're making, you can see it more. It's presenting himself more. The long-term benefits, we're starting to reap the rewards of the changes they are making. Still a lot more to do, but yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how that develops. But back onto transfers and Manchester United players, I want to start off, before we talk about maybe incomings, a little bit about outgoings. I'm going to stick with the midfield for quite a while, so stay with me on this one. Kobbie Mainoo, I want to ask about him first and foremost. There was a little bit of news this morning that he's in a position where he wants to either play football at Manchester United or seek a move away. To your knowledge, is that still the case? And if he does go, is there any clubs in particular that are in for him? And is Manchester United's stance still the same, that they want to keep him? Because the way I'm looking at it, this is a very talented player, and I understand having squad depth, but you can understand his point of view of just wanting to play football.
Yeah, especially with the World Cup in mind as well. And I think Kobbie Mainoo will do exactly what he did in the summer. If nothing changes, the January window will open. Let's obviously see if the festive period impacts anything and he gets game time. But if it's as it is now, come January, Kobbie Mainoo will say the same thing. He wants to go out on loan, play some game time somewhere else, try and force his way into the World Cup squad, and then all parties assess his future in the summer. From Manchester United's perspective, they may be more open to a loan with an option to buy, or obviously a permanent sale because it presents pure profit on the books. But I think if Mainoo is to get a move away, and it may not be his preference, but reluctantly it may be best for him and his career and his England chances, then Manchester United would also have to bring in a midfielder in January as well. So they're not going to be charitable, the same for Josh Zirkzee as well, and just give players a boost for their World Cup chances. They're only going to let these outgoings go mid-season if they feel they've got enough depth. And I know it's only playing domestic football and they're out of the League Cup, but naturally you could pick up an injury at any point and you could regret sending a player like Kobbie Mainoo out on loan. So we'll have to kind of assess it, I think, after the December fixtures and in the early part of January, because then Mainoo will understand, is Ruben Amorim going to rotate a bit more? Can he start a few Premier League games during the festive period? And is that enough to make him feel that he can review his future in the summer? If he's sort of shunned a bit from starts and minutes over the festive period, I expect from speaking to sources close to the player for Kobbie Mainoo to again ask to leave and for it to be a loan, because he doesn't want to ideally cut all ties with Manchester United, but he realises he's in a very difficult position. So there's continued urgency from Mainoo to get minutes in a World Cup year. Interested clubs, I've heard a few. One is West Ham, who have also looked at Josh Zirkzee, and we know that there's foreign interest in him too. And I'm told in the January period, West Ham will add a defender, a central midfielder, and a number 9 as they look to back Nuno and get out of relegation trouble. The other interesting club is Wolves, because of course Manchester United have been linked with João Gomes. I don't think anything is going to be possible for João Gomes mid-season, because again, Wolves need to back their new manager, Rob Edwards. They can't afford to be losing more players. And if there's a mass exodus mid-season, the same for Jørgen Strand Larsen as well, Wolves are going to be in very big trouble. But naturally, if a player wants one of your sort of assets and there's two-way business that you can do, then you have a much smoother conversation in January that tends to be a seller's market. So there's a few Premier League clubs that are interested in Kobbie Mainoo. Newcastle, let's not forget, hold a historical interest. I'm not so sure that they'll do anything in their central midfield mid-season, nor do I think that Kobbie Mainoo would be guaranteed minutes at Newcastle United as well, because it's only a 3-man midfield in a 4-3-3, and they've got plenty of options there, and the likes of Bruno Guimaraes and Joe Linton and Sandro Tonali, they're picking themselves at the moment in the centre of the park. And then Lazio was another club that made an inquiry in the last few weeks, again about a straight loan or a loan with a buy option. But at this stage, Manchester United are not really engaging with suitors, because they're telling Mainoo what they told Mainoo in the last few days of the summer window, that their preference, if not their diktat, is for Mainoo to stay, because unless they find another midfielder, the feeling is that he's needed as a squad player for Manchester United to make a push for some kind of European football, if not Champions League football.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a real tough one for him, but I want to see him play more. Let's see what happens. I can imagine that the player is probably quite frustrated with the situation.
Yeah, well, he will be frustrated, but it's Manchester United and you want a bit of frustration. It just has to be channeled in the right way, channeled to your development, channeled to how you train, channeled to being part of the team chemistry and dynamic and pulling in the right direction. And obviously when Manchester United were wobbling at the beginning of the season, it was natural to say, could it be a system issue, or should Kobbie Mainoo be given opportunities? But if they extend this unbeaten run, Ruben Amorim's perfectly entitled just to stick with his selection. And if they're winning and winning and winning and winning, then why tinker, even if players do have potential? And at a big club, a lot of managers look at how the players on the peripheries and on the bench react. Are they training even harder? Are they cheering their teammates on? Do they understand the situation? And that is the beauty, but also the challenge of a massive club like Manchester United. It will always be the case in the dressing room at Manchester United, whether they're winning, losing or drawing, because it's Manchester United. They'll always be in an inverted commas unhappy players. But the difference with Kobbie Mainoo is not if he's happy or unhappy or playing or not playing. It's does the player think he's got a long-term future at the football club? And if he doesn't, then maybe there'll be a tendency to agitate for a mid-season move, because if you realise it's going to be over anyway and it's a World Cup year, why wait until the summer if you can have a viable option in January? But let's see whether Manchester United also think it's a viable option, because if they don't, Kobbie Mainoo will be in exactly the same position in the summer. He'll ask to leave and he'll be given the same answer: no.
Especially when you've only got one game a week, it is difficult. And then we are going to talk a little bit about Stiller, Baleba, Adeyemi. I can see them coming in the comments, but I want to stick just a little bit with the outgoings now. Casemiro, Ugarte, two players that play a similar position for Manchester United. Casemiro, rumours this week that Ruben Amorim wants to stay and extend his contract. How is that going to work when he's the highest paid, well, one of, if not the highest paid player at the club? I assume Manchester United are not going to want to continue on that wage. And is Casemiro open to signing a contract of a lower wage? That's the first question. And then Manuel Ugarte, news also broke in the week about Ruben Amorim maybe not being so happy with him towards the end of last season. Can't really stake a claim to get into the team right now. Is he another one that could be assessing his future?
Yeah, with Manuel Ugarte, it's pretty quiet at the moment. I don't think he's assessing his future at this point. I'm actually told the opposite, that Ruben Amorim continues to think Manuel Ugarte is a strong fit for his system. It's just the fact that he's not over tinkering at the moment. And as you say, there's only one game a week as it stands. But I don't think there's an issue between Ruben Amorim and Manuel Ugarte as it stands. And once again, Manchester United are not going to have any kind of mass exodus of midfielders mid-season unless they find midfielders, and several of the names that we've discussed won't be available until the summer. With Casemiro, there is a very realistic possibility that Manchester United offer him a 1 or a 2 year extension, or even somewhere halfway house like 1+1 on reduced terms. The difference between Harry Maguire and Casemiro is that Maguire needs a new deal because they've already triggered the 1 year extension, whereas Casemiro's contract expires next summer, but there is a club option to extend by a year. But of course, if they just go and extend that, you would presume the terms will be higher. Sometimes, like with Robert Lewandowski at Barcelona, you have a situation where as the length of contract develops, the wage diminishes naturally. And Liverpool are very good at this with some of their senior stars, to make sure that the money you earn at the beginning of the contract scales down towards the end of the contract, because there's an expectation that you'll play less games and become more of a squad player. So I don't know the ins and outs of the 1 year extension, and if baked into that is a diminished wage anyway. But I think most sources are implying if Casemiro stays, it will be a brand new deal. And in that brand new deal, there would have to be a lower wage. Otherwise, the parties might just move on. So I think we'll get more movement on that, possibly even after the January window, even though Casemiro can, of course, start negotiating with other clubs. Maguire feels slightly higher priority to resolve one way or the other, because Harry Maguire wants to then focus on if he needs to find a new club, or alternatively wants to lock his future down at Manchester United long before the World Cup, in the hope that he can also force his way into Thomas Tuchel's thinking and only be thinking about the World Cup and summer at Manchester United, or knowing maybe a lot earlier he's pre-agreed something with someone else if they can't strike a deal. Casemiro and Saudi's the question I get asked quite a lot as well. No real movement at this stage. What's true is that the Ministry of Sport have held talks since pretty much 2023 with Casemiro, but he's never shown a huge appetite to go there. He was even given a non-binding offer with all of the terms and a wage of well in excess of £500,000 a week. I actually think, from speaking to sources, it was close to £750,000 a week in 2023, and the same offer in 2024. But he was never allocated a club. And the reason for that is because even with those astronomical financials, the player made it clear he wants to stay in Europe until at least the World Cup, if not a little bit later. So it wouldn't surprise me if Manchester United do extend Casemiro. I'm not led to believe at this stage he's given much encouragement to Saudi Arabia. But as you say in your question, if he is to stay, it would likely have to be on a diminished wage. And I think the player is open to that. He's enjoying life at Manchester United. But players of that calibre, and even Maguire, who is obviously more ingrained in English culture too, they've likely got the same perspective, which is why, certainly with Casemiro, less so maybe with Maguire, they may wait a little bit to find out what have Man United got next season, because Casemiro wants to be playing Champions League or European football. Maguire, to an extent, will be saying any kind of European football equals more games, equals more game time, equals better for him. So this is why it's quite a complicated phase of the season for Manchester United, because were they to go into next season with only domestic football, Maguire's perspective may change and he may think, I'm not going to get much game time, and Casemiro may decide to move somewhere where he can go and play Champions League football. So the next few weeks are going to be really important, because once the festive period has finished, it's going to be obvious in the league table if Man United are genuinely in the picture for Champions League football or not, because we'll be beyond halfway through the season.
Interesting stuff. With Harry Maguire, is United still keen to offer that new contract?
Well, Man United haven't made a decision, I'm told. So the Maguire side are really open to extending, and Manchester United are still debating what kind of offer to give him, both financially and in terms of length. Of course, the length would likely only be 1 year, but it could potentially be a 1+1. But I think the club's perspective with Maguire is also going to be shaped by how many games have we got next season, how much income are we bringing in, do we have Champions League football, and are we going to add another defender? And, you know, we've spoken before, even though they seem quite stopped on that side, about a left wing back or a left back. And I've said that if they don't go for that out and out profile that is a specialist on that left hand side, because of Diego Leon and his development, for example, and all the other senior players that are at the club, maybe they go for that left centre-back / left back. And if they had that kind of profile, then it's obviously bad news for Harry Maguire as well. So internal conversations are happening at Manchester United. Initial talks have taken place between Maguire and Manchester United. So Maguire's aware there's at least an appetite to discuss his situation, rather than everybody say we're calling it a day. But there's been no formal offer yet. Maybe that could change between now and the end of the year, or certainly when we get into early January and Maguire can start pre-agreeing things with other clubs. But at this stage, the talks have been informal and only initial, and it's Manchester United that are delaying as they determine which approach they want to take.
We'll have to see how that progresses with Harry Maguire, and like you said, you know, more games might mean that he's needed more. And speaking about European football and the appetite to go and get that, and the players that we'll need, I want to talk to you about two midfielders. The first one being Carlos Baleba. David Ornstein said recently that he thinks that is the deal that Manchester United want to do, but also Baleba wants as well, so it would be a good deal for Manchester United. Is that still on the cards, and would that affect Manchester United's interest in other players like Elliot Anderson, Angelo Stiller from Stuttgart, who have been linked to as well?
Not necessarily, because again, they want two midfielders, and they can get two midfielders at the kind of valuations for some of these players we're talking about in a number of ways. The first is qualify for Champions League football. The second is outgoings. If they were to sell Bruno Fernandes, wherever that may be, whether Saudi or whether in Europe, they're going to be able to bring in a significant number. You would almost certainly think Kobbie Mainoo being sold at pure profit not only helps the books, but in addition to that, allows them to move a bit more freely in the market, because it's not just pure profit on the books, which is great. It's also a reasonably high valuation, certainly in excess of 20 million, and some say in excess of 50 million. But of course, the price may have dropped due to the fact that everyone knows at the moment it's not an ideal situation between Manchester United and Kobbie Mainoo. And then the last thing is, regardless of the actual finances due to getting Champions League football or pure profit for a player like Kobbie Mainoo or Bruno Fernandes leaving, World Cup might slow the market a little bit. And then by the time they maybe start big spending over the summer, they'll be in a new financial year, and that can be very beneficial as well. So there's lots of different ways in which Manchester United can find this money. And let's not forget, if PSR is phased out as is expected and UEFA's squad cost control model comes in, then clubs like Manchester United with big revenue, in very basic terms, will have far more freedom to spend and stay within the financial rules as well. And this is why I think Manchester United can be confident that under all manner of different circumstances on and off the field, they can add two midfielders, and it won't be a case of Baleba and only one because you're putting all of that budget. But what might come into play, depending on the season and how it progresses, is if they added a Conor Gallagher in January and then wanted a Carlos Baleba and then decided a third midfielder is necessary because maybe Casemiro doesn't extend, Kobbie Mainoo's sold, Bruno Fernandes is sold. That's obviously just an extreme example rather than things that are definitely going to happen. That's where you start going, we wish we hadn't spent in January and we'd put it all towards summer budgets because many of the names they like are not going to be available mid-season. So then coming back to Carlos Baleba, situation, I think, speaking to sources, is relatively simple. January, Brighton don't want to sell. In the summer, regardless of his slightly indifferent starts of the season, feeling is still that they can get Moises Caicedo type money, but they haven't put a price on it. So what Manchester United have done is they've been very smart and they've done all the legwork. They've got the player buy-in. Carlos Baleba likes the idea of moving to Manchester United. He's not the same as, for example, Liam Delap, that would say, come the end of the season, if you don't get Champions League football, I'm not moving. He's more in the Cunha and Mbumo camp, that his heart is set on Manchester United in an ideal world. Of course, other suitors could come to the table and there may be competition, but that's the advantage of Manchester United moving, even though Brighton didn't want to do business last summer. They know the player wants the move, they like him, and they're not put off by the fact that at the moment his form isn't the same as last season. So that one remains a realistic possibility, but is a huge outlay. Could they do Elliot Anderson and Carlos Baleba? Yes, in the summer, because I'm not led to believe both players would be around 120 million. Can they do Angelo Stiller? Yes, because at the moment he's got a release clause. Let's wait and see whether Stuttgart buy that out for 2 million euros. But the release clause is not that high. It's relatively good value. So definitely could do a Baleba and an Angelo Stiller as well. And all you've got to really do is look back to the spend from last summer. And I think it's logical, with more big outgoings expected, even if it's just a handful, that Manchester United probably can spend what they spent last summer next summer. And if they get Champions League football, they can probably spend more, because they won't be looking at a total amount or a specific budget. They'll be looking at net spend. So if they know they've got an option of Casemiro's wage off the books, or pure profit from Kobbie Mainoo, or an important fee for Bruno Fernandes, or Harry Maguire's wage coming off the books and so on, Joshua Zirkzee could be sold, another player at the moment that's not getting any game time. They'll have certain finances like Rasmus Højlund that they can put on the forthcoming financial year. Add all of that up, and the net spend will probably not be that high, even if they spend 200 or 300 million. And this is why I think we're going to see a revamp. And I don't think it's a case if you have to pick between Baleba or Stiller or Anderson. I think their list of targets is so deep purely because they know they're going to add two important first-team midfielders in 2026 as a minimum, and they know some of the players have got competitions, and that's why there's a big long list. But I don't think they'll be put off by the finances, nor do I think some of these players that we're speaking about, particularly Anderson, will be as expensive as some are suggesting in the summer specifically.
Before I ask you about the striker situation, I just want to ask you a little bit on João Gomes as well. We were linked to him very recently, and we've been linked to him before. Would that just be a January pitch for Manchester United, or is he actually a long-term target for us, and could we revisit it in the summer if nothing happens in January?
Yeah, they've looked at João Gomes in the past, but at the time they were looking, he was very committed to Wolves and well contracted as well, so it was never really going to go anywhere. A name that can't be discounted, and a lot of players, I think, in Wolves have dispensation to leave if they go down. Not necessarily formal, but Wolves have always been quite fair to their players, and obviously some of them would be on big wages for the Championship anyway. So I think the expectation within Wolves, even though it'd be begrudging sales, is that if they go down, João Gomes in the summer and Jørgen Strand Larsen will both be available on the market, and there's perhaps not a relegation release clause like Leeds United had, because it's not quite Wolves' model, whereas when Leeds went down to the Championship, virtually all of their players had relegation release clauses, which is why there was a mass exodus. But I do think there's a gentleman's agreement and a fairness within Wolves that if these players are loyal and they stay beyond when there was first interest in them, and that was obviously the case with Strand Larsen and Newcastle trying to get his signature, that loyalty is not forgotten. So if Wolves go down, and there's obviously a very realistic chance that happens, the market's suddenly starting to realise that João Gomes will be available at a very good price. And the knock-on effect of that is that some may go to Wolves in January and say, if you're going down and you're going to lose him for a lower number, would you consider a higher number in January, because that money could be very useful to you, especially if you're on course to going down. And that's the sort of stick or twist decision that the Wolves hierarchy are going to have to make. Because I can foresee a scenario where people try for João Gomes in January, offering a higher number that isn't the relegation price, and seeing whether Wolves think that they can invest and they can add a few, and it's actually worth sacrificing someone for a slightly bigger fee. But the opposite argument they'll be debating is, should we just say a hard no to João Gomes and Strand Larsen departing in January, because obviously they're the best two players, or two of the best players, of trying to help keep this club up. And that, I think, will result in Wolves having a big decision to make in January, and suitors maybe, depending on where they're at in a couple of months' time, trying their luck mid-season for João Gomes. And number-wise, I don't think there's sort of a set amount at the moment, but historically, when clubs have come calling, Wolves were basically looking at Matheus Cunha type money, so somewhere in excess of 60 million. And if they can get above 65 million, I think they'd be very happy with that kind of number.
I think that's a bit too high, personally. I do like him, but I think that's a bit too high. But let's see what happens with it. Let's see what happens. I know Manchester United do need midfielders. Whether they go for it in January is another question. We'll have to wait and see. Is your feeling, Ben, that United will spend in January, or do you not think shouldn't they wait?
I think if the right opportunity comes at the right price, absolutely, they're not discounting it. So if you look at other clubs like Chelsea and Arsenal, the feeling is that they laid the foundations in the summer, and they may have quieter Januaries as a result, unless they pick up any injuries. But I think Manchester United will be more opportunistic in the market. And it may be there is a midfielder that they feel that they can get mid-season that makes all the difference. And, you know, if the outlay seems high, but Kobbie Mainoo was to depart on a loan with an obligation, or even permanently, not only is that pure profit, but the two might cancel each other out. So if, and I know he's not as popular as maybe a João Gomes, Conor Gallagher arrives, and that's between 45 and 50 million, and Kobbie Mainoo is sold for a similar amount, then not only do you amortise the Gallagher fee over several years, the length of the contract, so annually it's a small number, but you can put all of the Mainoo pure profit onto this current financial year. So it's win-win financially, because you get a player, and the player that you sell not only cancels out the outlay for the player that you buy, but it actually surpasses it financially in the short term, because it all goes on to this financial year. So there is a way that Manchester United can work to add a midfielder. And if they do something in January, I think that will obviously be their top priority. But what they won't want to do is just buy for the sake of buying, add another body for the sake of it, and then feel in hindsight it was better to wait and be patient, and then get higher ranking and more feasible targets in the summer that are simply not available mid-season.
Thank you very much. Good insight on that. So let's wait and see, everyone. Everyone very impatient with Manchester United and their January dealings, but we'll have to wait and see whether...
Beth, like, people want a sort of black and white now, and that's just not understanding how the market works. So it might feel that we're sort of repeating the same points, but the reality is everyone craves a daily update, and Manchester United will wait until the festive period. They'll look at where they are in the league table. They'll speak to some of the players they already have. Casemiro, what's your appetite like? Ugarte, how's he training? Mainoo, what's the form like? Bruno Fernandes, how is he doing in a deeper role? And then in January, or likely more mid-December, when they really make their decision-making to attack the January market, they'll say, okay, what are the pros and cons of adding now compared to waiting? Is it going to get us over the line, or are we good enough? What if Manchester United, when the January window opens, are still on an unbeaten run? What if they win, finally, those 5 games in a row? Maybe Ruben Amorim's turning around and saying, I don't want now, because I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want a big character coming in. If it was Elliot Anderson, he'd want to start every week, otherwise he wouldn't join. If it was Conor Gallagher, he'd want to start most weeks, otherwise he may as well stay on the bench at Atletico Madrid. So the last thing you want to do is change your squad dynamic. And naturally, and I get it, fans want the daily update. They think of it in terms of Football Manager. They say, if we transplant this player in, then it will all work fine. And the part that everyone forgets is the squad chemistry. And what does a new name do to the dressing room? Does a new name demotivate another player? Does it stifle the pathway of a younger player coming through? And I think because Manchester United have finally found a bit of momentum, Ruben Amorim may be a little bit reticent about rocking that unless the perfect kind of profile becomes available.
Well, I've got something new to talk about. I wanted to ask you a little bit on the forward line, and the first thing that a lot of people are requesting an update on is Adeyemi from Borussia Dortmund. Manchester United loose links to him this morning. Is there anything in that?
Yeah, I mean, they looked at him 3 years ago, so there's certainly an appreciation for Adeyemi, and he's heading into the final 18 months of his contract, and I don't think they're particularly close to making progress on an extension. So as things stand, he could be a market opportunity in the summer rather than mid-season. As far as I'm aware, Manchester United are only tracking the player in a normal kind of scouting way. They've not made any approach. They've not decided that he's a leading target or anything like that. And some of it, I sense, is games to try and allow Jorge Mendes to get the best possible deal over an extension as well, which, even though they're not close to, should not be discounted. And that extension, by the way, may have a release clause, which is why people are talking about a number of roughly in the region of 70 million. So this is one I think we should probably revisit more in March or April, because if there's no new contract, then suddenly he's heading into the final year of his deal and could be a market opportunity for somewhere in the region of 40 to 45 million euros. And at that kind of number, Manchester United may choose to revisit it. But there's nothing that's going to happen there mid-season. And I still think we have to be really cautious, because Jorge Mendes is simultaneously offering the player around, including to Manchester United, and not ruling out an extension at Dortmund. And usually when those two different scenarios are spinning simultaneously, clubs are just a little bit reticent that maybe they're being used as part of a game to get the best possible deal on an ultimate extension. And that's basically what happened, by the way, if you put the boot on the other foot, to Rashford when he signed his new deal at Manchester United. PSG were being leveraged. They met the Rashford camp, they met the agent, they were told there might be a market opportunity, and then they immediately realised that that was just put out there in order to return to Manchester United and get Rashford the best possible deal. So I think at this stage, we should take the link with a pinch of salt, because Man United are being offered the player rather than the other way around.
Okay, interesting stuff. And then the next thing I wanted to ask you around the forward line would be about Anton Semenyo. So it was put out this morning that he is requesting to leave Bournemouth and that Manchester United want to enter that race with Liverpool. Is there anything in that?
Yeah, it's not unthinkable that Manchester United in 2026 had a right-sided attacker capable of playing centrally as well, although Mbeumo ticks that box too. So it'd be fascinating to see how that dynamic would work. I know some people speak of Semenyo being converted more to a fullback on that right-hand side. I'm not so sure, because I think the player just wants to play in a more advanced position and have the freedom to score goals. As we broke on TalkSport, Semenyo has a release clause. That number is being kept very secret, but it's definitely in excess of £50 million when he signed his new deal. And at this stage, I think we would probably be shocked if anything develops too fast or too quickly heading into the January market. So suggestions that Semenyo wants to leave, with Bournemouth doing really well in the league and him enjoying life under Andoni Iraola and him signing a new deal, basically being told you could go in the summer, I'm not so sure that it's going to all escalate towards January unless somebody puts down crazy money. And I'm also at this stage not confident as to whether the release clause is even active in January. So I'm not saying it isn't, but Bournemouth sources are very coy about when the release clause even kicks in. So there may not even be a release clause option in January. It could be summer only. And again, if that's the case, you'd have to pay a crazy, crazy number for Anton Semenyo. So nothing to get excited about just yet. Manchester United like the player, but there's definitely a question of how he fits given who they already have in the squad, and Mbeumo in particular. And then other clubs in the Premier League are ones to watch as well. I'm hearing that Tottenham are really serious about Antoine Semenyo. They're going to be one of the clubs to watch at some point in 2026. And the other team that have been tracking Semenyo and could make a move are Liverpool too. So one thing's for sure, if Manchester United did make a move for Semenyo, they're going to face heavy competition. And if anyone wants the player in January, if that release clause is not active, and I don't know, so I wouldn't report with confidence if it is or it isn't, but if it isn't, the number's going to be massive if anyone wants to try and sign him mid-season.
Yeah, he's one of them for me where he's so good. He's really exciting. I'd love to have him at Manchester United, but then I look at our team and I think there is other areas that we need more than a right-sided forward player, because we've got Mbeumo and he's probably the best player in our team. And it's like we need midfielders, we need wing-backs, we need potentially another centre-back, potentially another striker, although Ruben Aaron does like to rotate that front three quite a lot, so maybe something could go with happen in terms of the rotation of the front three, and he likes them dynamic type of forwards. So it'll be interesting to see. I'd be gutted though if like a Liverpool or a Spurs signed him, because you just know how good he is, but you can't have everything, I suppose. But I want everything as a Manchester United fan.
Of course, it's Manchester United. Everyone will want everything. And it gets to the point where if you just tell everyone they're going to get everything that they want, it's great reporting, but we have to be realistic. And I think Semenyo could be difficult for Manchester United.
Last but not least, I mean, we've flown through everything today and I'm sure there's more to talk about, but I just want to finish off with this. A lot of people in the community are asking about fullbacks / wing-backs. Someone keeps asking about Tino Livramento. I mean, I know it's probably a really difficult deal to do, but would there be anything in that? Maybe it was the selfie with Joshua Zirkzee that kind of sent everyone a little bit like, Tino Livramento, would there be anything in that? And also just any other wing-backs that Manchester United have looked at? Is there anything there?
Yeah, not aware of that many wing-back targets at the moment. We know that Pervis Estupiñán was the one that they considered bidding for, and he ended up going to Milan over the summer. Right-sided, you can make an argument for sure that there's more need than the left side if Diego Leon comes through and does well. And it may be that instead of left centre-back and left wing-back, it's right centre-back and right wing-back, or the beauty of Tino Livramento is he can play on both sides. So I can understand why Manchester United would like the player. And let's not forget, Jason Wilcox knows him incredibly well. So he's a factor in all of this as well. Man City seem to be the club, speaking to sources, that are most adamant on trying to get Tino Livramento in 2026. But of course, if they make progress, and the feeling becomes Newcastle might settle, then other clubs will come forwards. And it is absolutely true that Manchester United have people that appreciate Tino Livramento, but it's simply not gone further than that. And Ross Wilson, who's the new sporting director at Newcastle, has just come in. And one of his first tasks, along with a few others at the club, is to get Livramento to sign a new deal. So keep an eye on that, because if that extension happens, it will likely rule out Livramento going anywhere in 2026. If we get to sort of February, March, and there's still no news on a Tino Livramento deal, then I think suitors will be quite encouraged by that. And maybe we then see a push towards somebody making a bid. But what I sense at the moment is if Livramento has a kind of leading suitor or the most serious suitor for 2026, if he doesn't sign that new Newcastle deal, it's unfortunately, as it stands at the moment, the blue half rather than the red half of Manchester.
Don't tell me that, Ben. Because
can't always be good news. Can't always just bring you a drip of good news. Sometimes it has to be other clubs are ahead of Manchester United. You never say never.
Never say never, because it would just frustrate me, and this is just coming from, a football fan perspective, is Tino Livramento, if there's any chance of getting him, he's literally the perfect player for Manchester United. It's sound defensively, brilliant going forward, can play on both sides. Is exactly what we need in that wing-back position. And I always thought it'd be really difficult to get him out of Newcastle, but with the contract situation and with them potentially, needing to bring in some money, I think it'd be the perfect deal. Yeah, so United, come on. It's like when City signed Aït-Nouri. I was like, what are you doing? He's right there.
I think they're okay though, Newcastle, financially now. I don't think they're in as big a PSR bind. And obviously this current season, regardless of where they finish in the league, they've got their Champions League money as well. And Livramento remains well contracted. So this isn't a situation of having to offer him a new deal because they risk heading into like the final year or losing him for peanuts. This is more about rewarding, because you may remember when he came to the club, it was him and Kieran Trippier on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side where he can also play, although he's perhaps not quite as comfortable. You also had some older players like Dan Burn was playing as a makeshift left-back. Matt Targett was at the club too. And then in the space of probably 12 months, Trippier ended up being benched for Livramento and Lewis Hall took the left-hand spot. And now Newcastle view them as the future. They want to keep both of those players starting and hopefully playing for club and country together. But naturally, because of the terms on which Livramento was signed before he really broke through, his wage will need to reflect that. So I sense this is about rewarding the player and settling him in the short term. But make no mistake, if that contract extension doesn't happen between now and the end of the year, or now and the early part of next year, suitors will be encouraged. And I would expect several to come forwards and make bids. And I think Man City will be one of them. And we'll have to wait and see whether Jason Wilcox decides Man United are also going to enter that race. But I'm not aware of anything yet developing or advanced. But it is true that Wilcox does like the player.
Come on, Jason Wilcox. He's done some good work so far. We have faith in you. Let's see what happens. Thank you so much, Ben. I really do appreciate all the updates. And I already can't wait to speak again. I know what have you got to do? Tell the viewers if you can.
Yes, I'm at Web Summit in Lisbon. It's a big sports conference. It has a dedicated sports stage. And I was on this morning with Tim Krul, the ex-Newcastle United goalkeeper and Dutch international. And this afternoon, I've got a few more panels, including on how sport interacts with technology, things like data, but also AI. And there's all manner of stars here. There's Lindsay Brewer, very famous racer. Edgar Davids is floating around wearing his glasses and looking the coolest person in the room. So it's a fascinating conference because it's not just sport, it's everything. There's an entertainment stage, a technology one as well. And I think the panels are streamed online as well. So you can watch back the Tim Krul interview on the Web Summit YouTube page. And I'm on stage again in about 25 minutes.
Brilliant. I love it, Ben. I'm very, very jealous of the audience that gets to watch that. Where's my invite? Next time, send me an invite. We can do the show beforehand.
No, it's raining in Lisbon, so you don't even get your 25-degree weather. It's horrible at the moment. It's London or Manchester-type drizzle. But yeah, you can come along to Lisbon next year. I'll get you a guest pass. I
love that. I'm not there for the weather, although I do love Lisbon weather when it's the summer. I'm there to watch. I'm there to take it in. That sort of thing is something I'd love to do. But thank you very much for making the time to speak to us and bring us the Manchester United updates that we've all been wanting, especially in this international break. Thank you to everyone in the comments who have put in your questions and topics. I really do appreciate that. Smash a like on the video if you've not already. And remember as well, link in the description for the Christmas jumper. There we go. Look at it in all its glory. Love it. Make sure you go and get it. But Ben, good luck. Not that you need it. And I can't wait to speak next week.
Speak to you next week. Have a good week, everyone.
Thank you. See you later.